get us started. Okay, welcome everyone. I, Council President Walsh, call the August 8th Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Our first agenda item is, as always, is public comment. So there are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. First, there's this general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period for each of tonight's agenda items. Members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you're joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, press *3. If you've joined by computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. If you are in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. So I will wait a moment and see if anyone wishes to raise their hand. So clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Council President, no one has signed up prior to the meeting, and I do not see any virtual hands raised. We have no attendees.
Excellent. Okay, then we will move swiftly on to our next agenda item, which is ID 1233, recognition of Robb Hunt on retirement as the Executive Director of Village Theater. So I'm going to proceed over to the lectern and call him up and see what we can do about this. This is way too tall for me. Excellent, join me back here.
Right.
So, tonight we recognize Robb Hunt on his retirement from Village Theater. You've made a significant, just minorly significant contribution to our community through your leadership and service. Since 1979, you've worked tirelessly to grow Village Theater and make it into the cultural and artistic powerhouse that it is today. From the city's perspective, Issaquah's economic vitality and downtown core has been greatly enhanced by your service. And so we wanted to thank you and give you this retirement plaque, which reads, "In recognition of your outstanding dedication and over 43 years of service in the arts. Your city appreciates you." Let's take a picture. Go. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
thank you all.
Do you have any words you'd like to share?
Oh, just thanks for all of the support the city of Issaquah has given to Village Theater over the years with all of our buildings and all of our programming and just the general support. It's been really great to work in Issaquah, and although I live in Bellevue, I will continue to come to Issaquah for my entertainment and restaurants and that kind of thing, because this is kind of my home. So appreciate everything you've done, and thank you for this honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, that is always nice to be able to recognize someone for their service. The next item on our agenda is ID 1149, the 2023-2024 budget, revenue forecast, and mid-year update. And for that, it will be presented by our CFO, Robert Hammoud. There you go.
Thank you, Council President Walsh. Just give me 1 second here to put the presentation up. Okay, so tonight is one of the first looks, and I apologize, it's August 8th, I know. This is one of the first looks at the budget for the upcoming. So just want to have the caveat as you see the slides tonight. All the data is very preliminary. We have, a lot of different things going on. I'm going to discuss kind of the factors we're looking at right now, and also keep in mind too, because we're full accrual here at the city, that our finances often lag 1 or 2 months behind, like for example, and so some of our revenue sources do as well as far as the reporting of sales tax. So this is our best shot at it mid-year here through the end of July, and this is the snapshot I'm going to show tonight, and also some of the assumptions we're working on to build the budget as we go forward for 2023 and 2024. And so right now, just to summarize, revenues are coming in stronger than anticipated, especially in utility tax, B&O, community planning and development fees. We're having, as I know Minnie's office is experiencing, pretty strong permitting and construction inspections this year. B&O has been very strong. We're seeing, and that's the business and operations tax, so we're seeing a lot of stronger reporting for our local business community. We're also seeing utility taxes are increasing as well, or utility tax revenues increasing. So we're seeing higher usage, especially with return to work for some of our major companies within the city. We're seeing more usage on utilities. And of course, the tax on top of that reflects the revenue increases we're seeing. So a lot of that's the return to work and just the economy picking up compared to this point last year. Recreations and parks fees are also returning to pre-COVID level of activity, so we're seeing a lot more signups in groups. We're also seeing a lot more facility rentals. Events are happening. Of course, events were still very limited this time last year. So we're seeing, if not a normal summer, very, very close to one. Expenditures, though, they're expected to finish about 1.9% under the amended appropriation for 2022. So that's due to staff vacancies, and right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the vacancy impact, but it has decreased since the beginning of the year. So staff is making progress. Again, with our human resources staff is fully staffed, doing a lot of recruiting right now, and we are filling those positions. So that vacancies gap is decreasing as we go forward. So this is the high level. I'm going to dig into the numbers a little bit on future slides here, but this is the high level forecast. So you can see our actuals from 2020 to our forecast. You can see the difference. The gray is the amended budget. So this is after the budget amendment that you ratified earlier this year, after the adopted budget, and then the forecast. And you can see back to kind of the summary I gave on the previous slide, the revenues are above our estimate. And again, just because we are seeing very strong business activity this year compared to last year. And expenditures, again, are slightly down, but almost all of that is attributed at this point on the general fund to vacancies. But again, the city is making progress on the vacancies. So current economic conditions, right now we have the way to phrase it is mixed economic signals. Consumer price index for the Seattle CPIU, this is what the city uses to measure, is up 10.1% from June 2022 over June 2021. That's driven by higher energy, housing, construction, and food costs. However, and the U.S. GDP has also contracted 2 consecutive quarters, negative 1.6% in the first Q of 22, negative 0.9% in the second quarter. However, the unemployment rate has decreased in July to 3.5%. That's the lowest point since February of 2020. And also the median home sales price in Issaquah in June was $1.1 million. That's 8% higher than it was in June. So that means half the homes that were sold in June were higher than 1.1, half were below 1.1. But however, the home sales themselves were down 19%. And just a side note, we saw, and we also saw with our real estate excise tax transactions, which again is a special revenue fund, but we have seen a lot of commercial real estate purchases and activity since the beginning of the year, some very large ones, and that is showing strong growth. That's very, very hard to project or predict that market. That market runs a little bit differently than the residential market does. So budget revenue forecast, and at any time you have questions during this, just please raise your hand and let me know, and I will answer those questions as we go forward. You can see, I won't go through every single one, just hit the highlights here. You can see that property tax forecast is pretty flat. Again, property tax doesn't grow much year over year because we don't have a lot of new construction happening within the city. We have some that will come online the next couple of years, but the base is pretty consistent. So right now we're seeing it's the same as forecast, about 10.1 million. Sales tax, you can see it's higher. Our forecast is about $1 million higher than it was in the amended budget. And what we're seeing on sales tax is very interesting when we go back to how the economy is doing. We're seeing really, still huge strength in anything business related. So in the business, we call it business to business, when local businesses make equipment purchases, data purchases, anything else that's taxable. We see that we're seeing a lot of activity since the beginning of the year. We are also seeing restaurants are essentially, they're pretty flat right now. So the restaurant industry looks like it's a little flat. Granted, our sales tax numbers, again, they lag 2 months. So the most recent numbers we have were through May at this point. June at this point. So they do lag a little bit. So we haven't gotten the summer numbers yet as we go forward. However, what we're seeing with sales tax as well is retail sales were up a little bit. We're not sure if that's because of increased activity or because prices went up because of inflation. We don't know how much of a trend that is. It's something we're going to monitor through the end of the year. Where we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown that we're going to watch through the end of the year right now, but it's still within our kind of margin of forecast, is construction sales tax and anything related on that. Think sales tax with, say, buying new equipment, buying new drywall for a project, and also the lumber yard at Home Depot. Anything that's picked up at Home Depot is taxable here. The lumber yard generates very large numbers for that company, and we're watching that. We're kind of watching the trends on that. That construction sector is starting to soften a little bit, but again, we're lagging 2 months behind, so we don't have the full summer construction season numbers until a few months from now to see how that actually panned out. Some of it could have been the weather, because the weather was still slow going into May. B&O, again, I said large increase. Again, we're seeing a lot of business activity return to the city. Utility tax follows that. And then again, planning fees, so community development planning fees were up. Parks fees were up again, just seeing a lot of activity compared to this time last year with the resumption of group activities, youth camps, and rentals. And intergovernmental revenues, you can see just a slight decrease. That's just due to the amount of grants we received in 2021 compared to 2022 at this point. So again, already kind of went through this a bit.
Before we move on, we do have one question.
Yes.
Councilmember Ray?
Actually, it's two.
Sure.
Two questions. The first one is sort of a math problem. So our sales tax rate is 1%, right? We get 1% of the sales tax?
No,
Oh.
I wish we did. We get 0.85 for the base rate.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank
Yes.
you. And then my second one is, would have been really interesting to have had 2019 revenue on here, so pre-pandemic. Do you know kind of how our forecast for 2022 is looking compared to 2019 pre-pandemic?
I can send you a chart with that information.
That
if
would
you'd
be
like.
awesome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a side note, if you're looking at the affordable housing sales tax, that's because the city does receive the full 1.1%. With the base sales tax, we receive 0.85 per RCW, county receives 0.15 of that. And so our expenditure forecast right now, year to date, we're on track through June 30th, about 49.9%. You can see everybody's tracking to their budget. What we're in the fire service, obviously, that's a contract. So again, we're billed, I believe, quarterly on that. So that's why it's a little slightly higher if we already made the payment. What we are monitoring again are the vacancies. So we're making sure that the vacancy number, could affect our year-to-date, year-end. But again, the city's making a lot of progress with that. We've reduced the amount of vacancies almost in half from this time last year. So they are dramatically going down. So again, it's about 34 as of last week. And again, we have other positions expected to be filled in upcoming months. Also, the expenditure forecast that I showed on the previous page includes the Newport pedestrian crossing that council added to the general fund budget. And then we are seeing inflation. This is one thing I did forget to mention earlier. We are seeing inflation beginning to impact capital projects and some contracts. There's a construction cost index, the Morton Incident Cost Index that's used regionally here, pretty much to index for all the materials we build in the capital project. The Q1 numbers are way up. We're still waiting for the Q2 will come out in September. We're assuming it's probably going to be higher than Q1. We're hoping that, inflation is peaking by the end of the year, but that's one of the uncertainties that we're looking at going forward building this budget. And so the long-term forecast, I just wanted to talk about this a little bit, how we came up with these assumptions. So we're looking at what 2023 and 2024, which would comprise the biennial budget, what would be built in there. So you're going to see higher increases built in the first year because of the inflation, cost of living, other assumptions that we have on benefits and services and supplies increases. We slightly lower that for 24 because we think most of the inflation this year would be experienced in costs for next year, going down after that. And then we assume about 4% or so increases going forward after that for each year. So the revenue line, again, it includes for 2022, you're going to see that drop to 2023. That includes the ARPA funding because we put the ARPA funding in the general fund. So that 66.2 includes that second tranche of the ARPA funding that was over $4 million. So when you take that out, you can see plus growth. That's how it drops from 2022 to 2023. And the expenditure side does include the ARPA as well, but it's more staggered because it's multiple years that we're spending those funds. And so you can see the total ending fund balance. And again, it is preliminary in the year. There's a lot of different factors that could happen. I'm going to show you on a future slide here what our assumptions are as far as our capacity during the budget and during the budget deliberations. But right now you can see the designated fund balance. We are forecasting, we're using the council target of 15%. We are forecasting the designated fund balance does include the ARPA funding in it. We are obviously going to spend it down in future years. Undesignated fund balance, you can see there does include some spend down, but also growth if there's revenues over expenditures. So we are spending it, but of course we're trying to keep the revenues over the expenditures. So you can see that gap there. But this does not include any new funding this year. This is just if we included our assumptions in the baseline and they held. So again, just base increases, no new additional one-time or ongoing spend. And I'm going to show you a little more detail in the next slide. Any questions on this so far? Great. So I went over this here. And yeah, just a side note here on the summary. Utility tax is tied to rate increases. I know there is for example, Puget Sound Energy did come out with a proposal for a large rate increase. I know that's being debated by the state. So we kind of took a little lower increase that they're proposing, and the utility tax would be at top of that rate. So we were kind of estimating what we're receiving in electricity bills the past couple of years, forecasting that out with a rate increase in there. Same thing with the solid waste contract, how that's built into the rates, maybe taking a little bit from demand in future years. But with certain core utilities, if you're talking water, you're talking wastewater, you're talking even most electricity, and same thing with solid waste, there's not a lot of, when rates go up, people tend to pay that. There's not a lot of drop off in demand for those services. That's unless there's an economic factor there. So the utility tax is very consistent through our forecast. Sales tax is trickier. Sales tax, we are anticipating a slowdown of the growth. So not a contraction, but a slowdown of the growth because there has been large scale construction projects the past few years. There's activity. There's still projects in the future, but fewer projects right now. So if another Costco came in or another large project, we would update the forecast to incorporate those projects. And we work with CPD to try to have the best crystal ball we can with some of that. But sales tax is cyclical. It's very hard, for example, to project auto sales. Like auto sales right now have been struggling because of the computer chip. But if there's an oversupply, might be discounted. We might see growth in the next few years. So there's a lot of those items that we're looking at with this forecast. But like I said, if you look at property tax and utility tax, those are your solid revenues going into the future. Sales tax, again, harder to project. And we also assume in our forecast that council would approve the annual 1% property tax increase in there each year. So this is the preliminary budget chart, and I have to do an asterisk, just subject to change. This is our best guess right now, but as revenues become clear, we get another couple months of revenues, get another couple months of expenditures, this could change. So again, this is our best shot at this point at August. We have till December to lock down all the numbers per statute. So if there's any fundamental change to this, obviously we'll come back to you before that happens. And again, we're targeting November passage of the budget. So any new information, we would notify the council immediately. But this is our best estimate at this point, again, with the assumptions that I outlined earlier in my presentation. And so I want you to look at the baseline. So the baseline, again, is, again, what we're assuming, all those assumptions on the revenue side. We have the designated restricted revenues because of affordable housing sales tax. That, again, because it's a full 1%, not at 0.85, that's why the forecast is 2.4 to 2.5 million a year. So it's a little higher than you would see on the sales tax growth. Forecasting expenditures, you can see ongoing and one-time. So we have some one-time expenditures that are already built into 23 and 24 in the baseline. Then we also have ongoing expenditures that are also in there too. So one-time would be one-time projects that were already approved that were multiple years. And I believe there's some limited term employees that were approved for 23, 24 in there. So that is what those numbers represent. Then you see the designated or restricted expenditures. And again, that's the ARPA expenditures, one-time funds. You can see 23 and 24. And so we're looking at this potential proposed scenario in 2023 when you go down the categories here. And you can see the ongoing capacity. So again, this is the difference between just the ongoing, you take the ongoing categories in revenue. Uh-oh, I don't know why my phone did that. Apologize. And ongoing expenditures. And so this is the ongoing capacity. So you can see the difference we're seeing between that 59.4 number for baseline ongoing revenues for 23 and 56.5 for expenditures in 2023 gives you that 2.9 million. So again, that's separate from the designated restricted expenditures for ARPA. So we're just doing what that ongoing capacity is. That's 2.9 million is what we're looking at. We have talked about the fund balance and spending down the fund balance. So we're offering a scenario here, what would reduce to the 15% target. We have additional ongoing capacity of 2.1 million, additional one-time capacity of 10.5 million. And so you see the impact on fund balance. You see the ending fund balance of 22.9 million if you were to do that, designated at 12.8, undesignated at 10.1. And so it gets you down to about 16% the first year, and then down to 15% the second year. Any questions on this?
Okay, Councilmember DiMichele.
So I'm looking at the affordable housing sales tax.
Yes.
And so as I'm understanding it, as I'm reading it, every year we're going to get about $2.4 million. And then that will go into the designated fund balance and just build until we decide to spend it.
That's correct.
Okay.
So if there's a spending plan attached to it, obviously that would do that. One side note I do want to make on that revenue source is because it is sales tax, it is subject to cycles in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
It is more sensitive to ups and downs. So that is something where we have a spending plan, we would, obviously designate a reasonable reserve on that as well.
Okay. So when I look at the projected designated fund balance, it looks like it's going down, but we're putting maybe over 3 years' time, we're putting like $7.5 million in there. I'm just wondering if we have, does the designated fund balance go down because we've got other plans for that fund, or?
Right, so again, it goes down on the designated fund balance. There were some items on that designated fund balance that do drop off in 24. I can come back to you with a list of those items that do,
Okay,
if that would be helpful.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
But Robert, they're unrelated to the affordable housing.
Unrelated to affordable housing, that's correct.
Right.
Right, the affordable housing sales tax, nothing has been designated from that sales tax at this point.
Right, okay, thanks.
Robert, would it be valid to say that one of the reasons why the designated fund balance decreases is because of the large ARPA expenditures that are in that designated fund balance? So as much as we're going up because of the affordable housing revenue, we're going down more than that because of the ARPA expenditures, correct?
I need to produce the list to you for the detail. I just want to make sure that we itemize those out, but I'll get that to you.
But that's certainly a big piece of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Anything else? Questions? No? Okay, let's move on.
Great, thank you. And so I think I went through all of these assumptions here, and again, subject to change, as we say, but at this point, this is the best information available to us to calculate that capacity. There are some adjustments to the capacity that staff is looking at right now in terms of benefit options, in terms of what's happening with labor negotiations that could impact that number, that 2.9 number that I did reflect on the previous slide. And that's all I have.
Okay, so at this point, we've got time for questions, and then we can go to public comment and come back for, I don't know if there's really any deliberation on this so much as just providing any additional questions that we have. And if, just one moment, I'm going to ask and see if Councilmember Hunt has any questions so that we can make sure she's part of the conversation. That's a no? Yes? I didn't see what your hand signal was. No question? Okay. Sounds good. Okay, then Councilmember Joe.
Thank you, Council President. Robert, thanks for the presentation. Some good information there that keeps us on task and keeps our mind on where we're going. I know that we're changing our budget from a single year budget to a biennial. And I know that you've gone through some of the challenges that we will experience. I know that we're going to have some additional sessions this budget time period. Can you give us an update on how your department's doing on the added work and that transition to a biennial budget?
Yeah, really appreciate that question, Councilmember Joe. It's not just our department, it's a team effort. So it's all departments in the city adjusting to that. So we've had trainings, we had a lot more discussions than we probably normally would at this point, but I think that people are understanding it. It's more of, what are you going to do the first year? How's the second year going to look? So I think it's certainly a change from past practice, but it's not out of the ordinary. We're hoping that our training materials and kind of our internal discussions have made it a smooth process so far.
Thank you. And then just one follow-up question. Looking ahead a year, the mid-budget examination that we do in the off years, we try to keep that short and simple and just have it be a review. What kinds of things would you recommend to the council for us to watch out for so that we don't let that mid-year review get out of hand or get too onerous as we look toward the future of the budget?
It's a very good question. Councilmember Joe, I believe, at least in my opinion, as the CFO, I would certainly say reinventing the entire budget process mid-year. It's supposed to be just a review. Statutorily, you don't even have to pass an amendment. We would advise one. But if revenues or expenditures are far off, then that would be the time to talk about it. Say revenues are higher than expenditures, we have additional spending capacity, then we would maybe talk about some enhancements at that point. But if it's pretty much on track or within the margin of error that we're looking at the budget, then again, we wouldn't request any fundamental changes at that point.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions, so I'm going to take a moment and see if there are any public comments related to ID 1149, 2023-2024 budget revenue forecast and mid-year update. So if anybody is online and would like to comment, if you're on the phone, you can press *3. If you've joined by computer or smartphone, you can look for the hand icon or make a comment to our clerk hosting the meeting. Do we have anybody who has signed up or indicated a desire to speak?
Council President Walsh, we have no virtual attendees at the moment.
Okay, and no one in attendance here has indicated an interest to speak. So we have an opportunity to, I guess, ask, is there anything else that you need on this subject before we move on to the next topic?
Not at this time. Again, we have more time with the council in upcoming weeks for updated budget information. We're working internally right now with Wally and the mayor on the proposals from the departments and vetting that out.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for the presentation. Oh, we've got one from Councilmember Martz.
Yeah, just to comment on the information we've seen in front of us. I mean, we just seem to have a real persistent oversupply of money and under expenditure. And I just want to point out that we don't have to spend it all, right? We could restructure how we revenue to take in less money. And rather than, we don't have to spend it just because we collect it. We could look at lowering our incomes and providing less of a burden on our residents. So I think we should have a conversation about, if you have these consistent huge surpluses that we have to keep dumping money into a fund for some future day purposes. It's not obvious to me that that's the best stewardship of our community's money. Thank you.
And if I can just add, Council President, members of the council, it's going to come to an end. I don't want to steal our thunder, but we have we'll have filled all of our vacancies, and that, I think, will do that. We're looking at a budget right now that expenditures will exceed revenues, and so one of the questions will be for the council, how much ongoing expense do you want to use with one-time money? And we're likely not going to suggest very much. So we'll continue to spend down fund balance on one time, but I think we will have an ongoing issue. So more to come over the next several weeks.
Okay, then I guess I was confused by what I saw, because I saw putting money into rainy day funds over multiple years, and I didn't see that slowing down. So.
And I think that is attributable to one-time expenditures versus ongoing expenditures. So that will be the discussion we'll have with the council. Because the administration's not going to propose these increased operational costs being used for those one-time dollars. So we'll continue to have strategies to spend that down over time.
Thanks.
Looks like an interesting conversation to come. You have a comment? Yep.
Well,
Deputy
and
Council-
also just really quick to say thank you very much to you and Susie for all your work on this. I'm sure it's taken many, many hours even just to get here and many, many more to come. So just know that this council really appreciates all the work that you're doing, especially ahead of our first biennial budget. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it too.
Okay, and with that, I think we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is ID 1225, Title 18 Land Use Code Future Updates List, formerly known as the Whiteboard. And before we go to this topic in the presentation, I just wanted to call on Councilmember Joe for a quick disclosure.
Thank you. I wanted to let the council know and any members of the public know that my employer is in Bellevue, and we're a membership organization for residential construction. And so I want to disclose that that's there, and that tonight, as we look at Title 18, there may be some topics in this subject area that could impact our areas that my membership sometimes delves into. I want the public to know that I've reviewed the materials and I've looked at the subject matter tonight. I believe that it's largely legislative in nature and has a wide impact on the entire city rather than an impact on any particular project or benefiting any particular builder or developer in the city. That being said, I wanted to make that disclosure, and if anyone has wants to have me not be part of this discussion, I certainly understand that. But I feel that after looking at the material that I will be unbiased and open-minded as to the topic and subject matter, and be using my very best legislative judgment as we discuss this. Thank you.
Okay, and seeing no other comments, then I'm going to call Community Planning and Development Director Minnie Dhaliwal for the staff presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, council members and members of the community. So this is an item which we're now calling Land Use Code's Future Updates List. And in parentheses, we started out with a number of names, but we landed on whiteboard at one point. So as we've worked, as you all know, we've been working on the Title 18 update for the last year and a half or a few months. And through those conversations that have occurred with the community, with the boards and commissions, with the council committee, there have been a lot of topics that have come up that aren't within the scope of the project. So we started capturing those in a list so we didn't forget them or lose them. They were important things that we had heard and discussed with everyone. So tonight, we're seeking your input on which items from this list should we tee up for the budget cycle in 2023 and 2024. As you know, this whole little bit of background, I think I got some comments or questions via email to do a little bit of historical check-in of how we came about with the goals and outcomes chart. So I'm going to try and cover in my presentation. The current update, obviously it's being guided by all our adopted plans: strategic plan, comprehensive plan, central Issaquah plan, park strategic, mobility master plan, climate action plan, and of course the great amount of work that Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee did when the goals and outcomes document was created. So, this journey for the city started in 2019 with the selection of some consultants to do some work. Then it was halted in 2020 while the committee was formed, and the work occurred in terms of what are the goals and outcomes for this current Title 18 update. So we took that, and then the council authorized the contract for the consultants in April of 2021. Which all of these plans and documents, and most importantly, the Title 18 goals and outcomes guided the update. And like I said, some of these things are, as we dove into it, were outside the current scope. We've given you the list, and it's organized by the 6 topic areas, which is similar to what our Title 18 code update is. So the natural environment, landscape and open space, zoning and uses, building and design. The 5th category is a little bit of a miscellaneous item, but we've called it zoning and development standards, but it includes affordable housing, transfer of development rights, landmarks, and parking. And then, of course, the 6th topic area, process and procedures, were still under discussion with BPC. So that last item, we're going to have those conversations with Planning and Policy Commission in August, this month. And then each of these items on the list, we've given it a number and a title. The committee, the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee asked us to put it in the format of intent. What's the intent of this item? What's the desired outcome? We've added some staff-suggested actions for that particular item. And then also the committee discussed of whether we should it's covered under the existing goals and outcomes document or not, so we've included that information for you to discuss tonight. And then if it's connected to any of the city's adopted plans. The committee, your council committee, discussed the process to use for prioritizing this, and they came up with these 3 items. Items that are most strongly associated with the goals and outcomes document. The connection to the city's adopted plans, such as Central Issaquah Plan, Master Mobility Plan, and the metric of effort needed for this, for a particular topic. And we also wanted to kind of highlight some of the big things that are on the docket to cover for the next 2 years. We have in front of us a periodic update of the entire comprehensive plan. That's a huge major effort. The current law is we have to do this every 8 years. It was extended by House bill to every 10 years, but the list update is due end of 2024. We're expecting $125,000 grant for this work from Department of Commerce. We have some other budget asks that will come to you related to this topic. We also received a grant of $100,000 from Department of Commerce that you all authorized, and we have kicked off our work on the housing strategies plan with Eco Northwest as the selected consultant for that grant work. And of course, thank you for funding the transit study. So there's $300,000 that you give us, and we did an RFP and selected a consultant to undertake that work. So that's ongoing, will continue for the next 2 years. And then, of course, the concurrency and the traffic model update. So that's not the items on the whiteboard list, but just that's on the work plan.
Director Dhaliwal, before you move on to that, I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what it means to prioritize and what the future updates list, what we're kind of considering here. So can you talk about, basically, we've got Title 18 and its current scope. We've got stuff that's currently on the future updates list, but what you're asking here is for some feedback on whether some of those should be prioritized in kind of the 2023, 2024 timeframe as far as work effort from staff, but also potentially a preview of budget. Is there any other way to kind of frame that so that we understand what these items are and why we're considering them tonight?
Yeah, so like I said, these are items that came through the conversations with Title 18 update. And so the assumption isn't to not ever handle this list, that we'll work on this list in a methodical, more thoughtful way, but also what there's a 32 list item. We're not done with the sixth bucket discussions with PPC, so it's a long list. And so what we're asking council to be thoughtful about, there's a funding, which ones should these tee up for your discussion on the budget, and also just from the bandwidth for boards and commissions, staffing, and to do a good job on some of these items. So how do we pick? Which is the highest priority for council? That one should be funded, and two, within the next 2 years, we want to capture it and get it done.
Okay, and then just another clarifying question. All of the items on this list relate to Title 18 and our land use code. So even if there's something on there that's like related to affordable housing, it's not talking about building affordable housing or anything like that. It's related to the code that would support potential affordable housing or something like that, correct?
Yeah, so our ask is to keep your discussion about items in Title 18 that should be prioritized. There may be a couple of items in there, like urban forestry program, that came through the conversations, but not necessarily as a code update. So for our purposes of discussion tonight, if we can prioritize the code-related items, which is majority of them, except for one or two, like that, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had that before going into these lists.
So should I walk through what each of the items is at a very high level? We included the more details in your plan, but for the first topic, natural environment, there's stream buffers. In this slide, I kind of show what it's covered under the existing goals and outcomes, and which is the highest, the closest long-range plan that it references. So we are updating our stream buffers. There's in your chart, I've kind of gone over what we are actually doing. We are in the process of, creating a technical memo that analyzes the best available science related to buffers. But regardless of that, we have some studies that were done in 2003 and 2006 that did more of on-the-grounds assessment for streams. So this item would update those. Would expand the list to other fish-bearing streams, and so that's that item. Noise code update, we just referenced the state law for that. There were some comments during the update that perhaps if we're looking at lighting, we should look at noise. Number 3 is the sustainability points-based system. So I'll explain that a little bit. What's happening on the building energy code scenario. So the state law was changed. It's going to take effect next year, July 2023, where commercial and buildings are required to be energy efficient. And there's a whole list of things that comes with that building code. And it deals with heat pumps, it deals with, you know, the lighting standards in an open office space. It talks about a bunch of things. But it sits in building code, which is Title 16 of our Issaquah Municipal Code. So that we're going to update. We're not asking for any funding or prioritization. That's just a requirement we have to do. With this current code update, we've had conversations with Planning and Policy Commission as a stopgap measure. So anything over 20,000 square feet building, we're going to require it to be third-party certified as LEED Gold. So that is Planning and Policy Commission's recommendation on that. So beyond that, if we want to take a look at how to create more sustainable buildings that are below 20,000, create an Issaquah-based sustainability score-based system. We did a peer city research, shared that with PPC, and it's really looking at what does that mean. A lot of our cities have an incentive-based, deep green incentives, where it's really trading more development capacity for sustainable buildings. So I'm not sure if that's the right approach for Issaquah, but if, looking at what incentives would make sense for Issaquah, and also those ones that won't get, that'll be more used. So we'll get the outcome of more sustainable buildings, and also coupling that with not just new development, but existing buildings. That's where you're gonna get the most, moving the needle in the right direction for reducing greenhouse gases. So that's that item, number 3. Landscape and open space, there was a desire to have a prohibited plants list. We're gonna have a reference to noxious weeds and all that, but not create a more plant palette. We're gonna update the tree list, and one of the environmental board members is helping us with some details on that list. And then the next one is urban forestry program. That's a discussion you'll have with the budget and Parks Department as well. The third topic area, zoning and uses. Cluster housing came up. This is again part of that diversity of housing item that we're studying with the for HAPPY grant, Housing Action Implementation Grant that we just mentioned. And then, of course, number 7 is emergency shelters and transitional housing. So this became state law as part of House Bill 1220. We are going to take care of this. This is a requirement. There's a comp plan element. We have to change our housing element, but also our code requirements. So allowing shelters and such facilities wherever hotels are permitted. So that's number 7. We also heard UV commercial retail zone to allow multifamily development, allow cafes in residential zones, prohibit self-storage facilities. We should have a more robust discussion about impervious surface limits, and then school siting and compact school design. So that's all under this topic 3. Topic 4, sustainable development. It kind of carries through in multiple topic areas, so we've carried through in all of them. But we kind of talked about this already. Neighborhood visions. This is already, I think, called out in one of our plans to have these robust discussions with 2 neighborhoods per year. So we wanted to put that in here. There's also eco-friendly materials discussion. Of course, there's the intertie between the building code and the land use code. What can we do now? We're going to attempt to fix a few things here, but this needs to be a thoughtful discussion because technologies changes and other things happen with building materials. So we also learned about the view sheds. There's a desire to protect the views. The regulations are very tricky on that. So in order to do a good job with that, we do need to have a full dedicated view shed study that really looks at from each vantage point, and what some of the protections and regulations could mean. Wayfinding regulations, again, we heard, even though we require these through block connections and other things, it's hard for people to know that this is a public space. We're gonna put some, signage requirements for new things that come in, but a more holistic connection of these passageways and through block connections, and even trails and other things is probably needed, is what we heard. Universal design regulations, again, these are things we need to kind of do a more complete check-in. We heard about the strict architectural style that we have in our regulations now, that perhaps we need to look at more of a form-based code and not look at architectural style. The form-based code in this case would be build-to lines, the form of the code and how that interacts, rather than more about pick one of the 5 styles approach. And this can be, broad, citywide, central, a portion of central. So this number 19 item needs to be more discussed. It could be tied in with a portion of central that really is providing this alternate form of housing, which is missing from, and improving our diversity of housing choices, and using this as a pilot project. Lot more discussions to kind of form what that does really mean and what we need to accomplish there. Number 20 was one of the things that
Director Dhaliwal,
Yep.
it looks like we have a question on the previous slide.
Yeah, on the previous slide, thank you very much. Can you go over again what number 17 is, the universal design regulations? I'm not sure I clearly understand what that item is.
Yeah, this, we have some of these regulations sprinkled throughout Title 18, but then we have our building code that really has an ADA component to it. And a lot of times it really isn't, there's a lot of nuances in that. So we kind of took that out from here and let the building code regulate that, because it's more geared towards this is what it means. And we need to kind of figure out if we need to go above and beyond the building code requirements for some of the accessibility requirements.
Do you know what universal design is? Would you like Director Dhaliwal to, can you put forth a small explanation?
Yeah, so my understanding of this, and I could be wrong, and because from where it came from, the discussions were more about if you have a play space area and some, a trail design, should it be someone in a wheelchair accessible can use it or not use it, and if you have a play equipment, how do you get all of those? And that's pretty regulated under the building code. But it's possible that we had these regulations in Title 18 prior to them making into the building code. But because there was this was a separate thing, that we put it in here to do further research of, do we need to go above and beyond what's already in the building code?
Okay, thank you very much, much clearer.
So number 20 is what the committee prioritized for, there were 3 things that they prioritized. So this one was align the code with adopted housing strategies. And like I mentioned, the grant that we received and the work that we've already started on this topic is really looking at 3 different strategies, 6, and 8, and 9, I believe. So looking at condos and what are the detriments there? How do we have inclusionary zoning, beyond just the 3 districts in central Issaquah, and then diversity of housing choices. So we'll be studying that and coming up with discussions with the Planning and Policy Commission and ultimately for council as part of the grant. But then there are other things that came up during these conversations, missing middle being one of them, single family zoning being, what are we doing for that? So all of this is a broader topic that's going to look at the housing strategies, the adopted housing strategies that the city has. Number 21, is transfer of development rights. Our interlocal with King County has expired. We had a good discussion with the committee to take a look at that again with King County limited to Issaquah Creek Basin outside the city limits, but also tie it with the, I'll give you an acronym, but it's really LCLIP program, where the city gets to keep some of the taxes that county would get for increased assessed value. So that's number 21. And then from 22 all the way to 30 or 31 are really parking related topics that we did a little bit different approach with parking in terms of not just going to the boards and commissions, but there were a lot of affinity group meetings with the vision partners and others and local businesses that addressed that parking conversation. And through that, it became obvious that solving the parking to just not have any minimums and just establish a maximum standard were much more complicated. We don't have transit now. Some of these parking requirements, obviously, we don't want to pave additional area for parking and not have sustainable development, but at the same time, it needs to be thoughtfully considered. So we've added all of these things that we need more detailed conversations in this on the whiteboard to come back and tackle some of these things. And then topic 6, we're still in the process. We've added one which came up about 5G poles. A lot of cities have these pre-made design options for city-owned poles that people can choose from. So it addresses the aesthetic concerns that the city has had previously, but it provides better connectivity. So that's number 32. And that pretty much concludes high-level, discussion about what's on the list. It's evolving, and it'll, we'll add more things if they need to be added as we conclude our conversation with the Planning and Policy Commission. But because of the budget and the items that need to be funded and the timing of that, we've brought it forward to you to start thinking about which of these items should we include in our proposed budget for the next 2 years.
Okay, City Administrator?
Thank you, Minnie. Excellent presentation. Let me just maybe amplify a little bit on that. Back at your planning retreat on July 16th, this was a major topic. And so we asked that the council committee review this, and we asked to include this evening as the topic for the committee of the whole. This is meant to be a resource discussion. We're not asking the council to make any decisions, take any sides. We're just trying to sort through of these, how big is the breadbasket? If it's a really big breadbasket, we may not have the resources to do all that. Even with all the fund balance we may have, we're certainly concerned about just planning staff. There's a comprehensive plan update that needs to happen next year. A number of things that Minnie touched on this evening, which are already just part of the work plan. So again, we appreciate the council identifying this as a policy issue and a resource issue back on July 16th. But tonight, we're really just trying to get a sense of urgency for how many of these projects so that we can come back to you in a few weeks, hopefully with an appropriate budget allocation, both dollars for outside help as well as if we need to make additional staffing changes in our community planning and development department. Thank you.
Okay, so just as far as process, I'm going to see if there are any following questions from the presentation. Then I'm going to see if there's any public comment. And then Councilmember Hunt, I'm hoping you'll kind of start the conversation with some of the topics that came up in the PDE committee meeting. So starting out, are there any questions coming off of the presentation that didn't get asked during? Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Council President. So I understand the goal around trying to figure out how much we can do, but I'm also struck with what really are the constraints. I mean, we can't expand infinitely even with the bestest consultants in the world. There's still a limit to how much we can do. And then I was thinking it's a comprehensive plan update year, and that's going to put a workload on PPC. And then there's the other boards and commissions that we would probably want to have engage in this too. Do you have a sense of, you know, what our capacity even looks like? So, because otherwise we're gonna say we want to do it all, or nearly all. So, I mean, just give us some bumpers here.
Yeah, you know, again, it's going to depend on which topics you choose. If you choose a very big, broad one, then I would say our capacity is to tackle one or two. And if you choose the smaller ones, maybe three, but not more than three.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was just looking for. Just, you know, just rein us in a little bit before we go too crazy.
And if I can just add, you know, we're hearing from you, we're hearing from the boards and commissions, a fear that this is all going to get lost in the shuffle. And so we just want to make sure that we're staging appropriately. I think I agree with Minnie just on sort of the broad assessment of things. But you all came to us as the administration saying this is really important. And so we'd also, well, thank you for letting us put bumpers on this, but ultimately you're the ones who set the bumpers. So we're trying to marry all that together, and whatever information and feedback we get from you tonight will certainly help that.
Deputy Council President Hall, did I see you wanted to ask a question? Okay.
So when we're talking about prioritizing some of these tasks, are we talking about it solely from the lens of what we want to accomplish over the next biennial budget, or what we want to get started over the next biennial budget years, or is that a policy question for council to consider? Does the administration have any thoughts on that?
You know, again, I think we're looking to just get feedback tonight. I think this is a workload of the 30 odd items that's a multiple year workload. Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I don't think we're prepared to say that tonight. But, you know, if you were to say the comp plan's enough, let's put all this aside and let's have that conversation 12 months from now, that's something. Or as Minnie said, if you think the staff can do 2 or 3, here are 4 or 5 maybe you can think of, and administration come back with a budget proposal and we'll talk some more about it in the fall.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point in terms of, you know, is it do the work, do the research, and then figure out what we want to do, whether we're going to finish in 2 years or we put them on the list for the next 2 years, but it doesn't mean if we have the time after the comp plan conversations, we obviously can take it on, but it could straggle more than 2 years. People lose momentum too sometimes when you're having those conversations if you drag it out too much, but it is something to keep, you know, as you all think of, yes, in the 2 years, are you giving us, like, start the work and finish it, or start the work and start working with the community, and then that'll inform, the research will inform what the next steps might be for some of these topics, more elaborate ones.
Okay, so any other questions that we want to ask before going to public comment? I'm not seeing any. So at this point, I am going to call for public comment on this topic. And again, if anybody is online on the phone, wants to press *3. If you're on a computer or smartphone, you can look for the hand icon. And I will first call for anyone in the room who would like to make a public comment. Okay.
Okay, my name's Connie Marsh.
So Connie, if you'll press the button on there so that it turns red. There, thank you.
My name's Connie, oh, there we go. My name's Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk, and I have been through this before. This is the old school council retreat that came out with 41 priorities that then the council would put dots on, and staff would sit in the corner with their jaws gaping saying, wow, the council has a lot of ideas, and how are we ever going to get anything done? And that happened every year for year after year after year, and it was playing whack-a-mole. It was so hard to watch because staff would run like crazy trying to keep up with what every different council member wanted, and we wouldn't get very far. And so that changed, and it got tightened up so that we created a strategic plan so that we would not play whack-a-mole every year. And here we are playing whack-a-mole again. So I do not see a good future with a list of 32. I do not see a good future with a list that is not prioritized by, this is state law. We have to do it. Priority 1. We have to do it. There isn't a choice. We have to fund that. What does that look like? Number 2, this is in our comprehensive plan already. This is a strategic plan goal that we have prioritized for the next 5 years. We have that. We spent years doing that. And now we want to have our 32 things. Now, the code needs a lot of work because we didn't do anything for 10 years. I would rather see the code every year have first the state law updates. Have to do that. We have to stay up to date that way. And then you could prioritize 1 or 2 items just for the code every year so that we have a more consistent rolling update of the code. Most of the items that are on this list, with a few little different ones, actually are policy questions and decisions that need the rigors of the comprehensive plan update, which we are already doing. So my third tier, that would be third, I guess, would be, is this something we want to put a check mark by, and then we want to feed this through the comprehensive plan update to see if it has legs in the community? And if it has legs in the community through a comprehensive plan update, then you get the policy language put in, and then you feed that again through your next update of your strategic plan so that everybody on the council has a narrow 5-year focus on what the city wants to accomplish, and you move forward slowly and incrementally. What I'm seeing is we struggled to get the central Issaquah plan for years and years, and now we are somehow losing focus on this 30-year plan that we had, and we're looking at other things. Okay, that's whack-a-mole. So I am adamantly opposed to this style of list making. I am adamantly opposed to great ideas, and they may be great ideas, but they must go through our established, slow-moving, excruciating, non-private process called government. And you need to remember you're representing us who live here. You can't see us. That's why I came down today, because it is more of an impact if you have to look at your people, right? It is not your government, it is our government. And we had finally gotten set in a bit of a system, and now we have COVID and we're playing whack-a-mole again. So I have one smallish detail, which is stream buffers. The language has changed, and I sent in an email and I never got a response. It indicates that we are assessing our best available science in this code update. And I had wanted that all along, but I had never gotten a real affirmation of what that would look like. So I would like to understand what that actually means. The stream assessments are a physical study that does need to be done. Ours is too old, but what state law requires is that our code update be based in best available science, which it currently is not. So I am curious as to what that detail means. I believe we're talking state law for that stream buffer. So Tier 1, priority 1, state law. I'm not going to repeat. I'm assuming you got it. I sent an email, and I'm going to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Do we have anyone online who has indicated a desire to speak?
Council President Walsh, we have nobody attending online.
Okay, fantastic. Can I ask somebody to go and remute the microphone so we don't get any echo? No, you sit down. We've got. I can be Wally. Oh, can you? Fantastic. Okay, so at this point, before we start in on our discussion, because the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee has had robust conversations about this, I want to make sure to have Councilmember Hunt kind of start us off and maybe summarize some of that conversation, which might answer some of the questions that we have in the first place. So, Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you, Council President Walsh. And please do let me know if you have trouble hearing me, because I know I've been having a little bit of internet issues, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah,
So
we can hear you, but we will definitely let you know, and I'll let you know if there are any questions that come up during your comments.
Great, thank you. The Planning, Development, and Environment Committee met on August 4th, which was last Thursday, and I do think that the staff memo that was in our packet for this evening captured the main highlights of that conversation very well, and I wanted to recognize the staff for that because it was a very quick turnaround. I think they had about 1 day before the packet went out to capture that conversation. We started fairly high level, and we discussed some ways that we could, going forward, prioritize this list of future updates for Title 18, our land use code. And we started with wanting to make sure that, firstly, anything that needs to be done for state law, that would be done. We did have a discussion about how previously items that were necessary to comply with state law got pulled out of the process entirely, such as the sign code update previously. So those would be dealt with first. And then as far as the prioritization at the policy level that we proposed using a framework where items that were closely aligned with our existing goals and outcomes document would be prioritized first. This would allow us to more closely finish the original, what we consider to be the original scope of the Title 18 work plan. And we still felt that that goals and outcomes chart has been really helpful for us in determining what we want to see from this update, and we still felt that those goals and outcomes are valid, and that we haven't changed in terms of wanting to have those outcomes from the update. So we thought we would recommend prioritizing that first, and then looking at other existing plans that the city has adopted, such as the climate action plan, also the master mobility plan. And I also wanted to flag that two council members, Councilmember Hall and Councilmember DeMichelle, sent in questions ahead of time, and for us to consider as a committee. And both of those questions had to do with alignment to other plans, the Central Issaquah plan and the Master Mobility plan, specifically the transit aspect of that. So we thought that as a second tier, looking how closely these land use goals align with our existing plans would be that second tier. And then potentially also looking at metrics of effort to make sure that we're doing the items that we can achieve with the capacity that staff has and the resources that we have. So we started very high level. We had that as a general framework, and I think we were all in agreement as a committee that made sense to us. Then we were asked by the administration to prioritize between 1 and 3 items using that system. So we had a conversation about that. The items that we felt were the most closely aligned to the goals and outcomes chart, and that would be very important in terms of achieving our vision for efficient land use and meeting our goals for environmental protection, as well as increasing housing diversity. So just for reference, these are goals 3, which is conserve and protect environmentally critical areas, goal 2, which is provide adequate parking while utilizing land efficiently, and goal 6, which is increase housing diversity. Using those, we prioritized items having to do with parking, which would be items 24 and 30 from the future updates list. Those have to do with the minimum and maximum parking, as well as transit accessible parking. And then item 20, which is missing middle housing. This has expanded even in that chart to include other housing related issues, and is really about aligning our housing stock with our housing strategy work plan. And then item 1, which is the stream buffer work item to update with the state system for Washington State Department, I believe, issue for classifying streams, so that we have the very best available science. And as Minnie has explained, we are updating and providing a technical memo on how the current stream buffer works, but we also want to make sure that we are updating that in the next go around. So that was our recommendation. And I also just wanted to thank the council members that sent in those questions in advance. They did help inform our conversation. And I also wanted to add one more thing, which is we did consider if we wanted to remove any items from the list, and Council President Walsh suggested, and I think the committee agreed, that we ultimately did not want to remove any items or pull any items into the current update, but we also wanted to, if possible, have the peer city review, literature review for those items that we are going to be proposing for the 2023-2024 budget. So those would be the parking related items and the housing related items. And I think this could also be helpful if we did accelerate that peer city review part of the work to show that we do intend to follow through on this list of updates, that they are future updates. They aren't going on a whiteboard and, to be dealt with at some future, far future date. We are committed to doing these items, and I think that getting ahead on the pure city review would help with that, because we are committed to this work. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Hunt. So with that, I think what the administration is looking for from us is just some general feedback. Like we said, we have this long list of 32 items, and we're not making any decisions right now, but we are coming into budget season where resources will need to be allocated, and trying to provide some feedback to the administration on how does the council, coming out of that summer retreat where we talked about budget priorities, how do we then take and put our, well, not really our money where our mouths are, but further emphasize or prioritize within that larger bucket of, hey, Title 18 future updates is important. Well, now we have to actually face the music a little bit and look at the individual line items. So, does anyone want to start the conversation here, or anybody have any other questions for Councilmember Hunt? Councilmember DiMichele.
I think my question is more for City Administrator Bobkowitz. So my concern, or my top priority, is the transit study, but we've talked about parking be involved in that, and my question to Minnie today was about transit demand management. And so I guess my question is, how expansive is that transit study going to be? What are the parameters around? I don't know if we can answer that question right now, but it seems like a lot could go into that transit study related to transit, but maybe we're defining the transit study very narrowly. So can you give me just a preview of what the parameters of that study might be?
Well, as you know, Councilmember DiMichele, I can answer just about any question you pose, one form or another. But Andrea Schneider, the Deputy City Administrator, is on the line, and my guess is she could answer it more concisely, certainly, and perhaps be more precise to your question. So, Deputy City Administrator, are you able to chime in?
Good evening. Hi, this is Andrea, and Minnie may be able to chime in as well, but the transit study is, the intent of it is to find out what capital projects we need to do to increase access to transit. So that may include improvements to our roadway system or other connections for first last mile connections. It will also importantly include things that we need to do for readying ourselves for the light rail and what we need to do with station area planning and considerations there. So I think those are the general topics associated with transit. There may be also some policies we need to consider that could help guide those investments and guide our planning for transit. But I think generally that's what the transit study intends on doing.
Thank you very much. So, so the issue of parking then would, it sounds like parking policy would be outside of, yes, okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Hunt, you had a comment or question?
Thank you, Council President Walsh. Yes, I had a comment in response to that question, which is the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee also considered some items such as the urban forestry related item on the future updates list. And because we concluded that a lot of the work that will be done under that item isn't directly related to the Title 18 land use, Title 18 land use code, we did not prioritize those. We did prioritize specifically those items that we thought closely aligns with the scope of that goals and outcomes chart from the original Title 18 update. But I just wanted to point out that we did discuss things like urban forestry, and they are on that list. Not prioritizing them in this process doesn't mean that they aren't prioritized. It's just that, and we had a conversation about how important urban forestry is, for example, but not prioritizing them in this process is because we, at least in that conversation, felt that the solutions for that will probably be more staff capacity or arborists, for example, things like that, which would not be a code update, and that we had addressed the code update part in the original Title 18 scope. So I think why I mentioned that is because I think Councilmember DiMichele's question is potentially similar. There are definitely elements of transit that will need to be worked on outside of the Title 18 scope. And so I think just recognizing that is helpful for this conversation. Thanks.
And I'll further throw in, looking at that transportation demand management on the future updates list as number 27, it's really about providing clarity to city regulations for businesses that are required to create a transportation management plan and clear criteria and thresholds. So there are portions of that relate to code, but obviously there's a whole lot more that we as a city want to do related to transportation demand management and transit studies and all of those things. So does that clarify? Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Council President Walsh, I just wanted to mention Stephen Padua just joined the online meeting, so who worked on the master mobility plan and is very keyed in on the transit study if you have any further questions for him on parking or transit.
Great. No. Okay. Yes, yep, general comments.
All right, yeah, I'll start off general comments then. So in terms of how I'm thinking the city should approach the Title 18 feature updates list, I guess no longer the whiteboard, is I was thinking, what's required by state law and what is required is kind of this first threshold that we have to meet. So there are a few that were kind of called out in the chart. I didn't think there were more than a few that were that way, but that's obviously first and foremost should be a priority as we're considering these moving forward. And then the second was, like I alluded to before the PDE meeting, which was alignment with plans, the Central Issaquah plan being a really important one there as we're trying to, when we're talking about Title 18 whiteboard, or Title 18, we've been talking a lot about, how are we effectively using our land here in Issaquah too, and we went through a huge effort in the Central Issaquah plan, so making sure that stays present. Now, the Central Issaquah plan and Mobility Master Plan live in the goals and outcomes chart, which is great, and helps call out those kinds of things. And as you see in the staff suggested actions for many of these actions, it talks about evaluating the policy and then also evaluating what peer cities are doing in the area. I think one thing that also needs to be captured in there is that a lot of community engagement that's going to have to go into each of these. So our plans are our North Star, right, that help tell us what we should think about next in terms of exploring policy and bettering outcomes here in Issaquah. But not all the plans and not every item in each plan has the kind of community buy-in that would allow us to be comfortable to adopt a policy right away, right? The climate action plan was a good example. When we passed that, we had some people come in last minute worried about, I think it was along the lines of natural gas and our goals around natural gas. And our response to them was, well, this is just our plan. This is what we hope to go through, and as we go through the items, it involves intense community conversations around what we can do, what's working elsewhere, what's providing good outcomes in other cities, and creating successful opportunity for residents. But then what works in Issaquah, right? In some cases it might not work in Issaquah, in some cases it does. So recognizing that Wally, or City Administrator Bobkowitz said, how big is the breadbasket going to be, or what are those bumpers on there? I think some of the major ones are, recognizing the amount of work that's going to need to go into communicating with the community and engaging with the community as we explore a focused set of priorities over the next 2 years is really important one. So I see, what's required as kind of this first priority, and then the Planning, Development, Environment Committee, thank you very much for your work on putting together your recommendations. I think that those are very aligned with, I see the Issaquah Climate Action Plan and the Central Issaquah Plan. So I see these as being good strategies to begin over the next few years and into the budget, but I don't necessarily see if we can go much more beyond this because of the amount of work that it will take to engage with the community and make sure that we're adopting policy that works here in Issaquah. So those are my thoughts. I hope it's helpful. I'm kind of seeing it as what's required, and then the PDE recommendations, which I appreciate your hard work on. Thanks.
Looking around, seeing if I see any other comments. Okay, I'm gonna chime in on mine. So obviously I've delved into this deeply on the PDE and having been on the ad hoc before that. I think I really just want to take a step back and say, my goodness, we've been working on Title 18 for a long time, and I really wish we could tie a bow on this and say it was done. But while we're going to get to one stage of done, that doesn't mean we have satisfied all of our desires to get our code right so that we're building the right environment for our community going forward. And so I view this as, first of all, finishing an existing project. I would argue in some ways that with our goals and outcomes chart having been adopted kind of at the beginning of this, saying, hey, we're gonna work on and improve some of our housing options. And we had a goal related to having adequate parking, but effective land use. And we're not actually getting those done. So I very much agree with the concept that those should be prioritized in phase 2 of the Title 18 work. I'd also say this was a community-generated list. And so we are absolutely not going to put this aside. They need to continue moving on. And then when I look back to our strategic plan, there's a lot in there related to Title 18. So in the growth and development section, it says, across the city, there are a variety of public amenities, housing types, educational, and other services that contribute to a livable community. Potential actions are identify and implement code changes and activities to address neighborhood-based and community-wide gaps in amenities and services, as well as develop code amendments to address missing middle and other housing option needs. So those in many ways speak to this idea that housing and amenities and the way our environment is built is very important to our community. We've gotten that feedback over the years. I think one of the areas that maybe we haven't gotten a lot of feedback on is parking, but I include that in there because you can't have effective land use for housing without being effective on how you use your parking, especially when we look at that central Issaquah area. Large majority of that is parking lots. And if we're going to be able to build housing there, we have to be effective in what's required and not required for parking. So those are the reasons why I think highlighting those two are really important. I'd also further emphasize that staff had started a good set of conversations with the community vision partners and other business sectors, as well as some of the community associations about parking requirements and minimums, maximums, and how it relates to Title 18. And so that conversation's already kind of started. I don't want to lose the feedback that was received from that and have it become stale. So that's another reason why I would include that. So I very much agree with the suggestions from the PD that aligning the code with the adopted housing strategies, item 20, the parking related items that were 24 and 30, and then also the stream buffers on item 1 are super important. And I hope that when we provide this type of feedback, it isn't limiting in, hey, if we have the resources to do more, absolutely looking at what aligns with our other plans is super important. But to me, those are items that, gosh, I really wish would have gotten done within Title 18, and they didn't. And so I really think those need to be prioritized as first come out of the second stage. Okay, now I'm going to go back and see if I can get any other comments from any other council members. Councilmember DiMichele.
All right, well, when I want to take to heart very much Connie Marsh's comments. I personally am looking at the existing work program items, and I'm thinking these are huge items just alone. And so the comprehensive plan, I have a sister who works on comprehensive plans, and so I know that is a huge outreach effort that needs to be done. We need to involve our community in that completely. That's something that we have to do under state requirements, and it's something we ought to be doing. And the housing strategies plan, we all know how urgent housing strategy is at this point in our history. Transit study, concurrency update, all of those need to be done, and they need to be done well. So I appreciate the PDE recommendations, and I think if we have the capacity, yes, let's look at those. The parking would be my top priority there because, again, it relates to both the housing strategies and the transit study. But the others certainly are well-founded as well. But if we're going to take on these major projects in addition to completing Title 18 review, I want those done well. And so I would say my expectation would be let's concentrate on those major items first. If we have the capacity, let's do additional ones as recommended by PDE. But if our staff capacity is not there, I want those 4 items done first and done well. So that would be my input onto this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Ray.
Thanks, Council President. So I haven't been on council as long as Councilmember Martz, but it's been a long time. And as long as I've been on the council, we have been talking about redoing Title 18 because of the problems it creates for our community and for the developers. And so we talk about, boy, I wish we had gotten further. But if you ever stop and look back down the hill that we just climbed up, how far we've come, and thank you to Minnie and your team for all the work they did, the work that PPC did, the work the Environmental Board did, the Equity Board. It took a lot of people and a lot of effort, the ad hoc committee. It took a lot of people and a lot of effort to get to this point. So there's still a lot to do, and I think there will always be a lot to do because the world will continue to evolve around us. But I just want to take a minute and bask in the fact that we moved the needle, and we talked and wringed our hands for a long time saying we can't do this because it's way too big. Well, if you chunk it, we can move it. So thank you for all the great effort, and there's still a lot left to do. And I actually think that this potential future work will never go away. I think we'll just add new things to it, and we'll prioritize them, and we'll evolve this plan over time based on the needs of the community and external drivers. So thank you for all that the team has done to get us to this point.
Director Dhaliwal, can I ask you a question? Councilmember DiMichele was talking about, staff allocation, whether we have time. One of the things that the PDE committee talked about was, obviously this was a very short turnaround between that meeting and this meeting, so we couldn't ask to get a sense of what's the required effort and kind of staff allocation that would be required for these. But that's something that you're planning to do in order to assess whether or not there's budget for this. And then can you talk about the difference between staff resource versus monetary resource and hiring consultants? Are any of these things that you would think would be more appropriate for consultants or staff?
Yeah, there's some items on there that are less staff intensive per se. It'll still take community conversations and all that, and the public outreach piece, staff will still be involved, but they're more technical. So stream buffers, on the grounds assessment, evaluating with the King County's stream studies and ours, so we can just hire a consultant to really take a deeper dive into that and get that done, right? So whereas housing, single-family neighborhoods is going to be a huge undertaking, and there's need to be really thoughtful conversations with the community. So, yes, that can vary. It can also vary based on the scope of each of these items. So right now, it's just a list of what the things we heard from the community, but they haven't been scoped out exactly. Like the form-based code could mean a huge thing. It could mean a slice of, do it as a demonstration. So we can flesh out and develop our work programs over the coming years in more depth. But because of the comprehensive plan update, which is a huge thing in front of us, right? So most of our energy is going to be focused on getting that right, because it's it's our 20-year plan. We are going to do it every 8 years, so it's not every day, But for the other part, we're going to learn a few things as we implement our Title 18 that we've just gone through. So our plan there is to have a check-in every year of a housekeeping kind of things that aren't policy conversations. I mean, some things on this list are policy conversations. But to answer your question, level of effort, it could be high for all of them, depending on how deep and exhaustive we want to do it. But our general approach would be, we did this big effort with Title 18. There's going to be fatigue with the boards and commissions to just take a breather from that as they get ready and gear up for the policy conversations in the comp plan. So we don't want to overwhelm our boards and commissions. They've done a fabulous job really digging into a deep, very complicated matter and synthesizing that into and giving us policy direction on that. But yeah, it's going to vary based on the scope of the things. But if I had to pick out of the three that you have on your list, the housing, diversity and single family is going to be a high effort from a public outreach and really doing it well concept. And then The stream buffers is more consultant heavy. Parking, I think we're gonna come back to the PDE. You guys asked us to do peer city research. That'll kind of set the framework of what, how much more from a public outreach and business outreach we need to do. So those two are more on the heavy side. Stream buffer is probably not is more consultant heavy.
Deputy Council President?
Just really quickly want to, again, reiterate that even these next up policy conversations for the Title 18 future items list are going to take a while. So we've already heard, the scope of work could take a while. Our ability to engage with the community on an intimate level to have good outcomes is going to take a while. We have the comp plan update next year. We've also, one thing we haven't mentioned yet, we've talked a lot about updating and better aligning the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, with the Mobility Master Plan. That's going to be a huge effort too. So I think we just all need to understand and be okay with the fact that this is going to take a while, and reassure the community that these are still policy conversations that are priorities for our community to have. And that I think maybe if we have this kind of once a year touch point that you were saying about, here's are just kind of the cleanup items, and these things are still on our radar, and some of this has evolved a little bit because some of these things are really cutting edge policy conversations in terms of they're only being utilized in a handful of cities across the country, and outcomes are just starting to be measured. And the best available science that we talk about, even just for parking or for housing density or anything like that, is going to change year over year as cities continue to experiment. And so I think we just need to be okay with the fact that this is going to take a long time, but we're committed to getting through this in a deliberate manner. So, and again, thank you to the Title 18 Ad Hoc Committee for all your work, including former Councilmember Goodman, and all the staff who've put so much time into our current Title 18 update, not even considering the whiteboard prep for us. So thank you.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Minnie, I just want to thank you very much for recognizing the fatigue that our boards and commissions might be having as well. I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but you're right, they've been doing monumental work, and we need to be cognizant that they are volunteers. And that they work in the evening, usually after they've been at work all day long. So I appreciate those comments, and I think that is something that we need to take into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, I am not seeing any other comments, and so I would ask, does the administration have what they need to take this to the next step?
Yes, and I just want to take a minute to say thank you to all of you. As I was hearing you all talk, trying to think of the best way to explain this, we're patting our head and we're rubbing our tummy at the same time. We don't have to do everything completely linear because we have an outstanding council, outstanding staff, outstanding citizen boards and commissions. We don't have to just do one thing and then wait and then go to the next. So it is a little bit different than perhaps what other councils have done as far as prioritization, because clearly this council has not said, do these things and do them now. It's let's integrate them into the work that we're doing, and the partnership between the staff, the administration, the council is really outstanding. And I guess I just want to take the second to say this is not something that happens in every community around, and that we're able to have these kind of conversations at the very high level that we're having them. The people who really win is this community, because it's no longer going to be, as one of the council members said, I guess it was Councilmember Ray, Title 18, we're waiting. We can pat our head and rub our tummy. We can finish up Title 18. We can start staging things. We could do it in a way that is respectful to everyone's time and resources. So thank you. This is a great way for us as all partners to govern. And so just wanted to mention that. It's really exciting.
Excellent. Director Dhaliwal, do you need anything else?
No, I think we got what we needed.
Okay. I love ending things on that type of a note. We'll take it. So our final item on our agenda tonight is ID 1236, City Council Connections with Boards and Commissions. And so this one is actually going to be presented by Deputy Council President Hall. So I'll let him start off and then we'll just kind of go into a conversation. There's no real presentation on this per se, but more of a conversation amongst the council members.
Thank you, Council President Walsh, and I'll, after some quick opening remarks and opportunity for questions from council, I guess I'll turn it back to you in case there's any public commenters on this item too. But hey everybody, it's time to revisit the issue of the council relationships with boards and commissions. So as you remember, when we were originally having our transition discussion about our transition from study sessions to committees, this item came up and we started to talk a little bit about, well, what is supposed to be the role between the committees and the boards and commissions? And that item was kind of tabled as we went through the committee process and establishing the committees, as that was a big haul for the council, obviously. Also, more recently, the Transportation Advisory Board leadership has expressed an interest in learning how they can be more effective and useful to decision makers, better understanding what the role is between the Transportation Advisory Board and the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee. And because of kind of the size and scope of these policy questions, I wanted to make sure we brought it to the full council for a discussion about this item. And this was an opportunity for us to talk about it before the recess. So there are a couple kind of problem statements then that we've teased out from these questions that were left unanswered from our original conversation during the transition from study sessions to committees, and also what this most recent situation with the TAB has brought up in terms of boards and commissions may not necessarily be able to clearly see how their voice connects into the decision-making process. So that's one, that boards and commissions might not feel as useful as they can be to decision makers. And then also we've heard a couple times now that there is a lack of opportunity for collaboration between the council and strengthening working relationships between the council and our boards and commissions. So from that, we kind of have two policy questions that I think could frame a useful discussion tonight. So the first of which is really, what is the most productive and useful way to understand our roles and expectations of one another, but then also of interacting with one another in public policy development. And then the other is this other discussion around, well, what is the best way to collaborate? And we've heard some ideas, the Welcome Back Boards and Commissions initiative, as boards and commissions are coming back to in-person meetings, has been part of this, and kind of establishing more connections between the council and the boards and commissions that way. So it could be the council's wish that we consider something like that, or we consider doing something more like that once a year, where a council member goes to a board or commission to say thank you. But there's also been the idea of, well, and this came up when we were transitioning from study sessions to committees, well, maybe we should have joint meetings between the committee and the board and commission, which brings up a couple questions. One, is it the role of council committees? But then also, can we logistically do that? So the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee has one board and commission that makes recommendations for it. PDE, I think, has 2 or 3. It's a lower amount. And Services and Safety, chaired by Councilmember Martz, would have 1 million, right? So, I mean, there are not necessarily 1 million, but you know what I mean. So that also presents another question there. So there are kind of those two high-level questions. And then some potential actions that we've scripted out here on this memo, so that address the problem statements that came before. Again, these are just some potential actions to start a discussion. We could do all of them, we could do none of them, we could do 1 or 2 of them. So anyways, just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork there for a discussion. If you have any questions on this would be a good time for it. Although first I'll go to Council President Walsh if there's anything else you wanted to add, flair into this conversation.
No, I'll keep my comments to discussion. I think you framed it very well. So are there any questions for Deputy Council President Hall on kind of that presentation before we go to community comments and then back to discussion? Looks like no questions. I'm not seeing anything from Councilmember Hunt. So I'm going to open to community comments. Again, if there's anybody on the line, on the phone, *3, on the computer or smart phone, look for your hand icon in the presentation, and I will ask our intrepid Connie Marsh if you would come in, press the button, give us your comments. Thank you.
Okay, Connie Marsh again. And let's see, 22 years of going to boards and commissions and watching the interface between council and boards and commissions. And so I'm gonna give you my perspective, which is boards and commissions feed into council. It is not a collaborative venture because council is supposed to be getting the information, not persuading a board and commission of a particular point of view. So I think that the board and commission will flow to council. If council has concerns, they feed it back to the board and commission and say, these are the concerns we have, will you do a review? You did this just recently. Now, the things that make the boards and commissions the crankiest is when they work and work and work and work, and then they have no idea what happens to what they've done. They can't see how their voice has threaded through to the decision making. And they don't want to watch the council meetings to see the communication between many of the boards to council is awkward. In only a few are they supposed to write a letter to council formally stating a position. Parks Board, for example, that's a very foreign concept to them because it feeds through their staff and then it just disappears. And so they very rarely have a picture of what their opinions have done. And so I would formalize the transmittal of opinions to council from boards and commissions so that they clearly know that they can write an opinion letter and it is appropriate. Now, Parks Board does not report to council, they report to mayor, it's part of their charter, so there might be some cleanup in all of that to make it consistent. Now, now that you have the subcommittees, in the past, once a year, you would have a couple of people from the boards and commissions come and talk about their work of the year and talk about the difficulties and things that were good or bad. It's almost a formality, and I don't know, but it did make people feel better. And then somehow, with all this excess money we now have, we used to have a party for all volunteers every year to tell them, hot dog, you guys have put in all this time and energy, so we're gonna give you a hot dog. I mean, I don't think they ever went above hot dogs, but maybe they did. And so I think having a street party for the volunteers is an awesome idea, and it helps create an informal conversation with the council members one at a time and the individual board members where you can talk about your dogs, or you could talk about a city issue without it being awkward or seemingly have a flow in the wrong direction from a whole committee. So I read some of the suggestions and went, no canoodling between council and boards and commissions, because that's backwards. Council has a lot of influence. Boards and commissions sit there and say, well, you know, what do you think the council is thinking? And it's not, we are trying to understand what the community representatives are thinking. That is the point of having boards and commissions. So I know I came off like a hot frying pan for that, but it's important. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Connie. And clerk, do we have anybody on the line indicating a desire to speak?
No, Council President, we have no virtual attendees.
Okay, then we can move on to comments, conversations, etc. Do we have any council members that would like to start off? Councilmember Jung.
Thank you. For the Transportation Advisory Board, I was looking at the code 2.92.050A1, and there's supposed to be a work plan that's created every year, and at least annually, the work plans to be presented to the city council to be finalized, prior to being finalized by the TAB. So that could be a way that is in the code for the city council to meet at least with the TAB committee without having to change anything that we're necessarily doing right now. And so that would, take the committee, our committee, out of the loop there in terms of any other things, because it's in the code unless we want to change the code itself. Just on another note, I think that Connie Marsh brings up a good point, that there's nothing that necessarily would prevent an individual council member from meeting with any member of the TAB, for instance, and there are 9 members on there, and you could have 9 separate meetings if you wanted to. You could just meet with the chair or the vice chair and reach some goals that I think I expressed during the conversation of the moving over to committees, in terms of building a rapport, understanding how each individual works and how they learn best, and make sure that the work of the individuals on TAB was being honored, respected, recognized, and or seen through the thread of the work that goes on, such that they could understand how their work came and influenced or had an impact on the final decision that was being made. So I think with those two pieces together, putting the onus on the individual members from the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee to meet with TAB members, and the annual report that should be presented to the council, the work plan, I think that would be enough interaction for the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee and the TAB. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to provide feedback, thoughts? Councilmember DiMichele.
So when I first got on council in November of 2019, my goal was to visit every board and commission, and I have to say that I heard some wonderful conversations, and it was a great education. And then along came COVID, so I didn't get to visit everybody. Now we can do the same thing, because many of the boards and commissions are televised and you can watch the video. But there's nothing like being there in person and listening to the nuances of the conversation for those that aren't. There was one suggestion here that perhaps a city council member could be a liaison to a board or commission. I think the point is well taken, that we don't want to create a situation where boards and commissions are looking to an individual or looking to the council for direction. We do want to hear their take on the issue, not our take, because we get our opportunity to give our take. So I think more opportunities for in-person interactions. I'd forgotten about those parties that they used to hold for volunteers. I think maybe that is a tradition that we'd want to restart again. I think that as individuals, we can decide whether we want to sit in on a board and commission meeting, but I think possibly in our rules of procedures, we should have some guidelines for that, around not trying to influence or not involving ourselves directly in the discussions. So I always think it's great for people to be talking to each other. I think it's great for us to create relationships. I just think that we have to be careful about how that's done, and we have to have clear parameters for how those discussions are held, so that boards and commissions remain independent and give us independent input. The other point I think that is well taken is what happens to their input. And again, how well are we communicating with them? We received your input. This is how it made a difference. Just closing that communications loop, I think, would be a really important improvement to the process for some of our boards and commissions. So those are my comments. Thank you. And thank you for bringing the topic up.
Councilmember Ray.
Thank you very much. Not really quite 100% sure how to go here, but first thing is I think it's really important, and we've talked about it to recognize the contributions of all the boards and commissions. It's not a trivial amount of work, and in some areas it's a significant amount of work. That being said, I think the council and the boards and commissions have a very different role, and I think we need to recognize and respect that role. And part of that is the boards and commissions are managed and staffed by the administration, not by the council. They're really a extension of the administration, not an extension of the council, though they advise us. We may confirm board and commission appointments, but we don't make board and commission appointments. So there's a reason for that. They're a little bit separate. And then in looking through the rules of procedure, and this is to Council D. Michelle's point, in section 8.03, paragraph 3 says, however, the council should be mindful of questions that may influence the boards and commission and thus interfere with the established role of the advisory boards in the public policy making process. So wherever we go, we've got to make sure that we don't overstep the bounds that should be in place by the administration for managing their boards and commissions, and that we don't influence the public policy process by inadvertently asking inadvertently asking any questions, right, wrong, or indifferent. Yeah. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Deputy Council President Hall, followed by Councilmember Martz. And then Councilmember Hunt, thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone who's provided input so far. I know Councilmember Martz, you're up first. I just wanted to quickly jump in to make a clarification too, because we're hearing a lot of, we don't want to influence board and commissions. We don't want to influence the public policy decision-making process, the process that goes through that. That's great feedback. On the second potential action, how we talk about kind of setting the table for a useful board and commission conversation, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what I mean by that, though, to get a better sense of is this nuanced approach something council thinks is productive and useful, or if it's also still fits in that category of influencing board and commission. So when we talk about setting the table, a good example of that in framing policy questions, a good example of that was what Councilmember Hunt did back when we were talking about the Anchor Parks initiative, right? The question that was to be sent to the Parks Board was, which anchor park should we fund with ARPA money? And Councilmember Hunt came in and said, maybe instead we should ask them to come forward and evaluate each anchor park. What are the reasons why we would fund, what are the reasons why we wouldn't, and frame it that way so then council can have a very detailed conversation about pros and cons for each conversation. So when we talk about framing policy questions and setting the table for our boards and commissions, that's what we mean. So for the people who are about to make comments, if you could speak to whether you think that is a productive thing that the council could do, or if the people who have already made comments before too, if you could circle back if you have any new thoughts on that. Otherwise, I'll just consider that you don't have any new thoughts on that particular item, but just wanted to set the table on that too. So thank you, and those are my comments.
Great. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Madam Council President. Completely agree with Councilmember Ray. Their mayoral commissions and boards, and one of the things that we always have to ask ourselves, I mean, we just a few minutes ago talked about what a well-oiled machine we are right now, and the collaboration that we get between the administration and the council. It is not always thus, and in times where there's more difference of opinion, which could happen, on any given issue, it's important that the boards and commissions have their independence. But so we shouldn't go to them. But can they come to us? We've had equity board people come before council recently to talk about various things, and I wonder if there's an opportunity for chairs to, upon occasion, come before council and be part of some conversation where we talk about things that are being keyed up, that are going to be going out to them. Or just they're here and they get to hear what's coming their way from council. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I think in terms of, was it making the table, setting the table? I think having chairs come here on some sort of regular basis would absolutely still maintain their independence, but would give them more visibility into the importance that their efforts play in what we do. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Councilmember Hunt, you're up next.
Thank you, Council President Walsh. I served on the Planning Policy Commission before I was on council, immediately before, and I recall not fully understanding in some cases where recommendations that we made would go and how they would be used. And specifically, I recall when we were working on the Central Issaquah plan and the visions in that plan, which was a big undertaking, I definitely saw that work. I saw much more context. I much more fully understood the context around that, the time-sensitive nature of that work once I was on council. And I think on council, we get different feedback. We understand in some cases how different plans will work together. Also, through the budgeting process, we understand staffing constraints. And so we may have pieces of context that are very important for how we will use information in our decision making. And I think through this conversation, which I really appreciate Council Deputy President Hall bringing forward, through this conversation, I would like to see us try out a way to better provide that context piece to the commissions. I have also heard from commissioners, not just on the tab, but on other commissions, wanting to better understand the process. I think this is a real issue, and I think it would behoove us to try some things a little differently. I like the suggestions that were in the packet. I do agree we need to be mindful that we're not influencing the decision, but rather that we're providing the context so that these boards and commissions who are working so hard, that they are providing information that is ultimately useful for us as decision makers, because that is a big part of their role for most of these commissions. So I like the suggestions. I'm open to other ways. I think Councilmember Martz made a interesting suggestion about a little bit different way of looking at the first suggested action, which has to do with looking at the work plans together. Maybe that could be looking at the work plans together with the chairs rather than with the whole commission, which I think could be a very big meeting. So maybe we could look at we could ask the administration, for example, to consider changes like that would make it more feasible. But I would like to try to make some changes to our process so that these commissions are better equipped to provide information that we will ultimately be using, and then also that they feel and that they understand their value in the process more clearly. So I think we have an opportunity to make those sorts of changes. I also tried out a little bit for the council committee. I had asked before our last Planning Development Environment Committee if there were council questions that we could discuss in the committee. I think we can always do that, but I just wanted to flag that because it was helpful, I think, to our committee that other council members that weren't on that committee provided questions. And so if there are those sorts of context pieces or clarifying questions that council needs to consider that will then be important for committees as they do their work, I think that would also be important for us to consider how we can best do that. Again, not telling the commissions ultimately what to decide. I completely agree that that's not the role. But are there pieces of context such as how time sensitive something is, how we might use the information? For the parks example that Council Deputy President Hall raised, in that case, we had new information that night. And so, is there new information that's coming into play, and how do we make sure that the information we get back from the commissions kind of addresses all of those variables? So those are my comments. I would urge my fellow council members to let's consider making a change so that we can try to address these these concerns from our commissioners who are working so hard, and then let's check in with them and see if that change is working for them. Thanks.
Okay, so we've heard from most of our members, I think everyone, so I'm going to go ahead and throw in some of my comments. So I also came from PPC directly before this, so I know how hard and how unappreciated that work is, or rather, not unappreciated, but it's hard to see that as a board member as you're sitting there doing the work and all of that. One thing I really wanted to appreciate from a staff level, I know the mayor has asked staff to really improve the communication that goes back to the boards and commissions to give them a sense of how their work has continued, closing that loop, give them a sense what's that next step that council is going to take with their work. And as I've watched some of those board and commission meetings over the last year or so, that really feels like, oh, okay, I can see the future of the work that I have done. So I want to appreciate that as one aspect of how do we give a sense of how important this work is and how much we value it. I'll give another +1 to the idea of an appreciation party for the board and commission volunteers. I think that's another way that we can do that. We can create some of those in-person meetings. I know when I went to 2 of the board and commission meetings recently for their first meeting back and just said, oh my goodness, thank you so much for all of the work, it was very much appreciated. So I think those connections as a way to say, thank you, you're valued, are very important. So we should keep that up. What I've heard from from different council members that I wanted to highlight, Councilmember Joe talked about work plan collaboration, and I particularly like the idea of doing that with the board and commission chairs and vice chairs. I think that's a great way to kind of formalize that and show a sense of, hey, here's what you're going to work on and how it flows into the council work plan. I think that's a great idea. I agree with Councilmember Hunt that having clarity for the board and commission members on how their policy flows from the board and commission to a committee, to the full council, to a decision, to budget is really important. So I'd like to see us create some kind of a chart. I know that's been discussed a few times, but I think that would be really useful for each of the boards and commissions to understand what that connected idea is. And then I really like the concept that Councilmember Martz talked about having the chairs come to council, and I'll add to that, or write letters to council if that's the way they prefer to do so, just as a good way to bring them into that conversation, allow us to thank them for the expert feedback, and show them how that pulls into the decision-making process. I think that's really useful. One of the things that kind of came to me on this was, gosh, I really liked the idea of having a connection between our committees and the boards and commissions that were in their scope area, but I really don't see any way to do that effectively for the ones that have the larger board and commissions. So it's a nice idea, but I think if we do some other things around work plan collaboration, appreciation parties, do some annual once a year council member going and saying thank you, I think that creates some of that connectivity. And hopefully if we see how the work plan collaborates and then we show how the policy flows through, and then staff takes it back to the board and commissions, that creates that closed loop sense of what you're doing is important and here's how it's used. So those are my thoughts. So I will see if there are any other comments. I think everybody's had their say, and so I'll say to the administration, do you need anything else from us? Or maybe it goes back to you, Deputy Council President Hall, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at it if that's okay, City Administrator. So thank you all very much for the very detailed conversation on that. My hand is cramping from taking notes from everyone. I think in terms of next steps, and correct me if I'm wrong, we'll try to kind of digest and internalize what you've said here and work with council leadership to work with the administration on what next steps are. I won't go through everything I've heard, but some of the major things that I've heard from this council are that being able to close the loop and show how board and commission decision making feeds into the public policy making process is really important. That we continue to find opportunities to appreciate and show value to our board and commission members, whether that be through a street party or welcome or thank yous from council members, and then also to be mindful of not influencing the public policy decision-making process too early on as it's coming to the council. So those are kind of the three major things that I've heard, but based on the notes that I've taken, and I'll probably come back and rewatch this conversation, we'll work with the administration on next steps and come back to council with something that makes sense, that's in line with what we're doing. It clearly won't be all the things that were described here in this memo. It'll probably be much more of a light touch. So, which is what I've heard today. So does that make sense, City Administrator?
It does, and the only thing I would just add is the recognition of our Chief of Staff, Tina Eggers. You know, we put together thank you bags for all the members of the boards and commissions, and we've been handing those out. We tried to make the July 26th event sort of a little party, recognition party for them, but it was 100 degrees outside, and we didn't see as many folks as we had hoped, but we were handing out little notebooks and little seed planters with a nice bag and a nice note of recognition. So I think COVID's made it difficult to obviously have people together, but I do want to recognize that we did do that outreach this year for the boards and commissions. But with that said, we're happy to continue to work with council leadership, and we'll move forward.
Excellent. Once again, great feedback, everybody. So at this point, we've got one more agenda item, which is good of the order. So looking around, seeing if anybody has anything they need to bring up. I am not seeing anything. So after our meeting, we do have a special meeting, which is an executive session, so don't go anywhere. But at this point, I'm going to adjourn our meeting at 8:46 p.m. Thank you.